episode of Stan the History Man. I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Sandler. I want to remind you that the every Saturday at 5, uh, we will have questions and answers. You have agreements and disagreements about this program. I'll be glad to deal with them. Well, today I wanted to deal with the Red Army. Okay, um, and of course, very much in the news at Ukraine. And what really impressed me was now experts are saying, for what experts are worth, that the Red Army has done very poorly in Ukraine, and the way that the Ukrainians very that stopped the Russians, and then all the experts say, oh, they'll roll right over Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine versus Russia. And yet they've not only stopped them, they've even mounted some counterattacks. So it got me background to the Red Army. And in a sense, why is it so bad? And I think the reason is that they have a top down um, uh, command. You don't just do, it's as you see things. There has to be a a boss there. And in fact, they say 4 generals have died in Ukraine. And not just they said, this is fairly accurate information, that 4 generals have died in the Ukraine operation. And that is, they figure, because they're right up front, because they have to keep their eyes on the troops. Well, so let's look at some of the background of the Russian army. And it was first formed in the wake of the Russian Revolution in 1917, and it got into combat in the Russian Civil War. That is the Reds, as they were called then, uh, the Red Army, against the scattering of conservative, rightist, monarchist, whatever, who could never really unite. And so but the communists were united, and if you weren't united, you get shot maybe, and that they finally won. In Russia, the Civil War cost about 2 million Russians dead. I mean, this they had gone through a major World War One, and then which they lost to Germany, which I spoke about before, and now you have this terrible Civil War. Things sort of eased up in the 1920s under Lenin's policy of the new economic policy. Not a very original name, but he it must have been wormwood and gall for him, but he did allow tobacconist stores, a laundry maybe to operate, even for profit. The evil word of profit, to make money off somebody, but they had to do it because the country is falling apart economically, and this worked out fairly well. And at least the Russians could buy stuff and go into a store and not have the clerk snarl at you. And there were some Russian Red Army officers, high ranking officers, who realized the way the world was going. This was the world now, the tank, the airplane, working together, combined arms. And they said, we'll do this, the Red Army along those lines. Stalin had them shot. He had his best general shot, and a lot of people below the level of best general. I mean, there were, I mean, field grade officers who were shot just for being, Trotskyites or spies for the Nazis, and that was going to have disastrous consequences. I mean, here he knew that the Germans are really building up, and so you go and shoot your best generals. But that's Stalin, I guess. So when the court had a treaty with, or an understanding, it was a treaty actually, with the Nazis, that we'll just leave each other alone. And but then, of course, Hitler, to Stalin's surprise, invaded on June 22nd, 1941. And the Red Army was thrown back in catastrophic defeat. The Nazis got to the gates of Moscow. Now, by every combination you want to make, the number of tanks, the number of personnel, whatever, the Russians far outnumbered the Nazis nonetheless. And a lot of it wasn't necessarily due to incompetence in the Red Army and the Red military forces, because of course he shot his best generals, for example, Tukhachevsky, and then he again, the top down, I'm telling you what to do. And what he said to is, you hold on to every inch of the soil of Mother Russia. All the Germans did was just go around those places where the Russians were, and block them in a kettle. And disastrous at Kiev, called Kiev then, not Kiev. Um, they caught more prisoners than apparently any other modern loss of prisoners in modern times, and even that compares very well to British lost at Singapore, where every bloke there practically was captured by the Japanese, and they just rolled along. And by the time, the first time they were really stopped was at the very gates of Moscow. Advanced units with Nazi units with field glasses could see the towers of the Kremlin. But then I don't know, Stalin got smart or what, but he got a large number of Siberian troops. Now this is December. A lot of them, and they to them the cold was that it was about 30 below or something. For a Siberian, that's kind of normal weather. For the Germans, of course, this was terrible. I mean, everything froze, the vehicles and all, and it was really bad. But these new and invigorated Siberian troops hit the Germans on December 7th, 1941. Now, you may have heard that date before. Yeah, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, but on the very same date. Now, the difference with the international date line, but the same date, the Red Army smashed back at the Germans and drove them back about 100 miles. And Stalin was beginning now listening to his better generals, such as General Zhukov. See, Zhukov had been in the Far East fighting the Japanese, war that we don't know much about. And this time, under Zhukov, a good commander, the Russians defeated the Japanese. And there's all stories within stories here. One of the reasons why Stalin did not have Zhukov shot was he realized that the Japanese would not attack there. Stalin's spies in Japan told him that no, the Japanese are going to head south towards the Americans and the British, and they're not going to mess with Siberia at this time. So Stalin could withdraw his troops, a large number of them, not all, of course, from Siberia to Moscow. And they say the Germans were thrown back about 100 miles. So, and Zhukov then came to preside over the Red Army forces in the West. Now, even so, the Red Army was distinctly inferior to in what people are saying now about the Army, 80 years some later, in terms of coordination, intelligence. One thing you say, the Red Army soldiers, and there were lots of them, but in terms, and their artillery was very good. They'd always had good artillery and pretty well managed. But even after the defeat at Moscow, the Russians then had another advance, and they were stopped cold, pounded, and badly defeated by the Nazis. This is after this pretty bad defeat. In fact, the first serious land defeat that the Germans had suffered, and the Russians said, "Well, they'll carry on with it," and the Germans not only stopped them cold, they did the same old thing that they'd done before. They surrounded them. Stand your ground, don't you move, do what I tell you. The Germans just surrounded them. Some pretty severe losses. The German attitude was almost the exact opposite. To kind of summarize it, quickly simplify it, they'd tell, let's say in the field, they said, "Now take that hill." Now, the way you take it, it was understood that's your business, but I want that hill taken. So if you want to go around it, if you want to have a feint movement or a frontal attack, whatever, of course you have to pay the consequences. But that was up to the individual commander. So that was the exact opposite of the Russian system, where you're told. And in fact, alongside the commanders were the commissars. Communist enthusiasts who would make sure that what the commander did was in line with communist ideas. Okay, let's see. I got a couple of questions here. How did the Russian army do compared to the Red Army? Was it better than? No. Well, the Russian army, that goes way back to beyond Peter. Yeah, it actually had Peter the First in the 1680s. Was the founder of the Russian army, and he modernized it for those times. And that's the Red Army. After the Communist Revolution, the Red Army was founded. It was called the Red Army of Workers and Peasants, something like that. So you have the Russian army, which has had a long tradition of fighting and it's the thing. Everybody's invading Russia. Even the Swedes invaded Russia I think in the 1690s, and of course Napoleon, as you know, in 1812. Um, so the two things the Russians have and used, but at enormous personal cost. One was lots of land, so they had what they call scorched earth retreat, which is what they did. Well, later on with the Germans, with uh, in the beginning, just hold every inch of Holy Mother. Well, I would say Holy Mother Russia, but Mother Russia, and then lots of people. So you retreat, you burn everything, and then finally you make a stand with all kinds of soldiers. Um, but this, I say, is very heavy in manpower because the Soviets had the Soviet Union had a total loss of 25 million dead in World War II. Now, a lot of those were civilians, of course, because the Germans looked upon the Russians as subhuman, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess you could say maybe 19 million of them were actually Red Army soldiers. So let me see. There's another question here. They still have gulags. What happens since under Putin? I don't think they have like official gulags anymore, but they have lots of prisons. And what happens to dissidents under Putin? Well, it's official now. It's 15-year sentence. Now, to be fair, whether how much that's carried out, I don't know. But that woman who made that protest on Soviet news, so-called news, she's still around, but she is liable to a 15-year. In fact, you get 15 years for even saying the Russian invasion or the war in Ukraine. You have to call it a special operation. Okay, and Vlad the Impaler says that it's going well. This special plan was very deep, in the Russian way, carefully planned for everything, and it's going well. It's straight out lies. I mean, obviously it's not going where. Um, how long did Peter the Great reign? I don't have that exactly, but it's 1680 to 1690s is, and Peter was uh, realized that Holy Mother Russia and all that's fine, but we've got to get modernized. We've got to get up to date. And he went to Europe, and for example, he worked in a shipyard, a Royal Navy shipyard. I think it was one at Greenwich. He was out there sawing wood like any other laborer there because he said we need a navy, and so he's the founder not of the Russian army but the Russian Navy. Now Russia's a great land power, but Navy wise, it hasn't been all that impressive. World War II, they didn't do again a lot of very brave people who died, but I don't think they did an awful lot strategically speaking, except for one thing. They sank a German ship evacuating Germans from the onslaught of the Russians. The Wilhelm Gustloff was the name, and it's considered the biggest single ship loss in, well, at least modern history. So like 7,000 people. I mean, it's not the Titanic is like 1,100 and whatever, but this is 7,000 for the Wilhelm Gustloff. Now it says here that woman who made that remark was thrown in jail. The last I read that she had not been, but we'll find out. We're talking about the Red Army, of course, not protesters. But it is interesting that you have a lot of protesters, and well, 14,000 of them. And Putin says they're insects, they're scum. You spit them out of your mouth the way you spit an insect out of your mouth. Obviously, he's a dictator, and lies like dictators. Oh, the operation goes exactly as planned. All right, anything worse here, Peter? Well, tell me more about Peter. Well, I say he was the founder of the Russian Navy, and you could say the founder of the Russian army as well. And he modernized Russia. That was a big thing. He modernized. He moved the capital from Moscow to St. Petersburg as his window on the west. I actually didn't move it. He actually built the capital at St. Petersburg, which later on, the name changes in Russia. St. Petersburg after the revolution became, or just before the revolution, became Petrograd to make it sound more Russian. And then with the death of Lenin, it became Leningrad. And now, of course, it's back to St. Petersburg. So a lot of cities are like that, like Stalingrad. Well, Stalin's a bum. They de-Stalinized, so now it's Volgograd. Anyway, that's yeah. But I say that I was talking about the Red Navy. Well, even before that, under the Tsar, the Navy lost the Russo-Japanese War. I should talk about that in a little more detail. Maybe the Japanese defeated them on land and on sea. 1904, 1905, the Battle of Mukden, which the Russians were defeated, and then the Battle of Tsushima, which the Japanese outfought and out strategized uh, the Russian Navy, and so to everybody again, experts' astonishment, of course. So they I guess it seems that's like the experts get it wrong all the time, but they certainly didn't expect the Japanese to defeat the Russians. Okay, well, back to the Red Army, the Russian army. Then gradually, I guess you could argue that a lot of the incompetents were either weeded out or shot by Stalin. The general, for example, who's in charge at Kiev, he's pleading over the radio, Comrade Stalin, we got to get out of here. And then, they're almost ready to surround us. And Stalin said, don't you move. Well, he was shot, and a couple of other ones as well. So, Stalin didn't mess around. You don't do what he tells you. But then more younger generals officers came to the top to be generals. And a real triumph of the Red Army was at the Battle of Kursk in the summer of 43, in which it's the biggest tank battle in the world. Because I mean, both the Russians and the Germans were no slouches when it came to tanks. And you could argue, many people have, and even at the time, that the T-34, the Russian T-34, was the best tank in the world, the best combination of armor and gun power. You can also argue a near-death experience can bring your life together, and you can argue that's what's happening in Russia. If we lose this war, we die or become slaves. I mean, literally, a lot of times works. Oh, we'll be slaves if they win. Well, that's exactly what the Germans, the Nazis, had in mind for the Germans. But the Battle of Kursk, this great naval tank battle for about 2 weeks it went on, and the Germans were defeated. One of the reasons why is because the Russian intelligence had improved, and I believe we shared intelligence information with the Russians because they were allies then during the war, and they knew what the Germans were up to. And from then on, it was pretty much that the Germans were being pushed back by the Russians. But enormous casualties and battles, and of course Stalingrad would be the great Russian epic, which is still many books have been written about it. The way that the Russians surrounded the Germans at Stalingrad, and here the Nazis are saying, "Don't you retreat." And the General von Paulus in Stalingrad said, "We've got to get out of here, before they close up the kettle here." And he said, "You will not give up 1 inch." And so General von Paulus and I think 13 German generals, the Ninth Army it was called, went into captivity, plus 100,000 Nazi soldiers out of the 300 that started out there. It's a catastrophe. Not a single German got out of Stalingrad, all right, in which finally von Paulus surrendered in late January, early February 1943. And that the Kursk tank battle, KURSK, and Stalingrad battle, that really sealed it was not much of a question after then about who would win the war. And of course, by this time, the Allies were in it, the Americans were in it. The Americans came in the very day of the Battle of Moscow, and of course, the British had been in since the invasion of in June of 1941. So it was constant pushback, slowly and murderously, because I don't know if there's any army better in a fighting retreat, than the German army in World War I or World War II. And as a matter of fact, they got to Berlin in May of 45. And we made a deal that we'll let you take Berlin. We should take it because we were closer, but no, they've suffered so much in the war, whatever. They almost something like 90,000 dead taking Berlin. And it was the great triumph. Now, after the war, of course, the Western armies, as after World War I, cut back a lot of their military. Never as bad as after World War I, but still. And the Red Army didn't really cut back at all. And but here's where they were smart. They didn't get involved in Vietnam, and they didn't get involved in Korea. So I'll give them credit for that. But this is kind of a time for historic reflection on the Russian army. Just we thought the Red Army or the Russian army steamroller, how much of a steamroll is it, or just a lot of people, and in defense, a lot of land? I don't know. Anyway, thank you for listening and watching. I want to remind you again, Saturday at 5 o'clock, you can put your. Oh, well, here's a couple more questions. Just a second here. Let's see what they. How far back does the Orthodox Church go? As far back as the Catholics? Um, I think so. I think the Catholic Church would be. I mean, when did the Catholic Church actually start? But 300s, the Council of Nicaea. The Orthodox, I think they're later, and they were centered around, of course, the Constantinople, which is now, of course, Istanbul. So I would say the Catholic Church is the elder of the two. Another question: why did Khrushchev bang his shoe on the table? Okay. Yeah, 1960, he was in the United Nations, and I forget what the controversy was on, but he was getting really angry, and he took his shoe off and banged it on the table. I was there in New York at the time. It was a sensation, but I'm not sure why he did it. He's just angry at the UN. And oh, question: what kind of tanks? Well, I mentioned the T-34, which was the Russian best all around tank, I think you would say. Now, a lot of criticism. Well, American tanks like the Sherman tank, they weren't as good. That's not true. We mass produced, rugged, reliable tanks that may not, in terms of firepower or armor or whatever, match a lot of the German tank. The problem with the German tanks is they were built like a Mercedes. Okay, quality, but it's expensive, and so in fact, they couldn't repair them in the field, which we could do. The Americans could do, and so they had to send them back to Dusseldorf or wherever the Mercedes are built to have them if they're damaged, that type of thing. It's a much more difficult operation. We'd have a couple of trucks and about 20 GIs, and we could put a Sherman tank together, unless it was really blown apart. I mean, that happened too, of course. So I think our tanks got a bad reputation. We kind of do that in this country. Our armor, our weapons aren't as good as the enemy and that type of thing. Well, in this case, they certainly are. Let's see more questions here. Yeah. So anyway, just want to remind you that we're open for questions again on next Saturday at 5 o'clock, and I look forward to talking with you then. Bye bye.